Today, my guest on this episode, it's a bit special. Geoff McDonald has been a campaigner for mental health on the global stage for many years now. Now, Geoff has a enviable history, 25 years with Unilever as the global vice president and vice president of HR, formerly responsible for 170,000 employees across 90 different countries. So fair to say that Geoff has some experience, but a very interesting background that led him to look at transformation, but also his own personal mental health, and thus become a really strong voice across the world for mental health. Geoff McDonald, welcome to the Mental Space Podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Scott. And I'm so looking forward to having a conversation with you around a topic which I think we're both very passionate about.
I believe we are. Geoff, we have a tradition on the podcast, which is we always first ask, what does mental health mean to you?
Do you know what mental health means to me, Scott? It means being healthy at what I call a cognitive level. So what do I mean by that?
Yeah.
It means that I am able to think clearly. It means I'm able to concentrate. It means I'm able to look at some data, analyze that data, and make an analysis. It means that I can make some good judgments around some data that I might have analyzed. Do you know, mental health and being mentally healthy and having wonderful and optimum cognitive abilities is a wonderful thing to have. It's a wonderful thing to have, mental health.
I love the smile on your face. You're already improving my mental health, Geoff, just on this conversation. So I guess I have to ask the next question, which we always ask as well, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your mental health right now?
Right now, it's probably a 8. Because I'm feeling very focused. I'm going to be thinking very clearly in terms of what you and I are going to be talking about. And so my mental health, my cognitive abilities is around about an 8. If you were to ask me, what is my emotional health right now? I would say I'm probably a 4.
A 4.
Or a 5, in that I'm feeling a little bit anxious about our conversation today. It's an emotion that I'm feeling right now. So there's a little bit of anxiety. And I suppose what I've got to be careful of is that anxiety does not in any way influence my cognitive ability, which is sitting my mental health at an 8.
I promise you this podcast is a psychologically safe space.
I'm sure. But I don't know why. I do these things, I don't know how many times, but I always get that little knot, that little bit of anxiety beforehand. But I'm sure as we go into it, you're gonna relax me.
Absolutely. Well, if I read your CV, I would actually be quite surprised perhaps to learn that Geoff, the human being, actually has a degree of podcast speaking to, degree of anxiety speaking to little old me. Having 25 years, top of the game, global vice president, 170,000. I mean, that sounds like a man that is used to dealing with pressure situations. But I also know that, there's a reason why you became a mental health campaigner. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your superhero origin story? A bit about your life, but then how you transitioned from the corporate world and being very much at the top of the corporate world to becoming a mental health campaigner.
Well, thank you, Scott. Yeah, so look, as you probably, some of your listeners might have recognized or worked it out, I'm a South African. I grew up in South Africa. I was schooled in South Africa. I went to university. I then started my career as a teacher many years ago, teaching maths and biology at sort of A level. And then after about 3 years of teaching, I kind of stumbled on this company called Unilever. And
I've heard of them.
Yeah, I hadn't even heard. I was a biology and maths teacher. I mean, I knew nothing about business and Unilever and Lever Brothers Anyway, but there was a job going which was around training, and I suppose there was some sort of link between training and teaching. And
Yeah.
I get this job, and I then have the most incredible 25 years working for Unilever.
Yeah.
8 years in the South African business, 5.5 years working across Africa, the Middle East, and Turkey. So I spent a good bit of time in the Middle East, where you are right now. And then off to Australasia for a couple of years, and then back into the corporate center to do a couple of global roles, one around leadership and talent, the other one around marketing, sustainability, communications. And it was the most wonderful career, 25 years, traveled the world. My children had the most wonderful upbringing in living in different parts of the world. But in 2008, and at the time I was doing a global job looking after our home care business. One night, and I'll never forget the date, Scott, it was the 25th of January, 2008, which was the day before my daughter's 13th birthday.
Yeah.
I got woken up at midnight with a massive, massive panic attack. And that was the last straw that broke the camel's back. In that, at midday the next day, I was in a doctor's rooms and I was diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. When I left the doctor's rooms that day, I made a decision that I think saved my life. And the decision I took was not to be burdened by the stigma that is associated with mental ill health.
Yeah.
And that allowed me, and it empowered me to be able to tell my family, some of my close friends, some of my colleagues at work what was wrong with me. And, during my time off work, which was 3 months, Scott, I had dark, dark moments. I had moments when I didn't think life was worth living. I was a burden to everybody around me. But the only thing that kept me alive in my darkest moments were the two most powerful emotions in the world. One was a sense of being loved. And I could feel that sense of love because I'd been so open about my illness.
Yeah.
And the second emotion was a sense of hope, because I used to meet with a colleague of mine who had been so sick 2 years prior to my illness that that he was admitted to hospital. And I was never that ill. But I used to meet with Martin every 10 days, and I saw he was better. You know what he gave me? He gave me hope. And over a period of 3 months, I slowly begin my journey of recovery. And by the way, I work very, very hard every single day of my life to maintain my recovery, because I am somebody who is susceptible to anxiety-fueled depression. And so I need to maintain my recovery. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I have a small discipline that I employ every single day, which has kept me healthy, both mentally and emotionally over the last 12, 13 years. And then I went back into Unilever, and I went on and I did another job, which was the sustainability, communications, and marketing role from an HR point of view. And 4 years after that crucible moment in my life, I lost a very good friend to suicide. And the night he died, I lay in bed and I thought to myself, what's the difference between him and me? And the only difference that I could, at a very simplistic level, come up with was I'd been able to talk. And he hadn't been able to talk. I'd been able to experience that sense of love and that sense of hope. He couldn't. He was an alpha male, Afrikaner, South African, and there is just no ways he could talk about his mental and emotional struggles.
Yeah.
He couldn't ask for help. And instead, he took his own life, Scott. And I lay in bed that night and I thought, that is an injustice in the world. It's just unfair. Because I know had he had a common physical illness, he would have asked for some help. But because he was struggling with, by the way, a common mental illness, he didn't think he could ask for any help. And I just thought that that wasn't fair. And so that was the catalyst for me to then say, you know what? I want to do something about that. I want to try and create a world where every single person every single person who might be struggling mentally or emotionally feels that they genuinely have the choice, genuinely have that choice to put their hand up and to just turn to somebody and ask for some help. And if there's anybody listening to us right now who might be struggling and suffering in silence, I would just ask them to turn to somebody that they love and they trust and just ask for a little bit of help. And so I then co-led a piece of work in Unilever around breaking stigma. And after seeing the success of that work, I decided to leave Unilever, middle of 2014, so almost, 10, 11 years ago, and go out into the world to campaign, to be an activist, to help organizations think very, very seriously about how to go about creating more psychologically safe spaces where people feel that they genuinely have the choice to just ask for some help if they are struggling mentally or emotionally. So that's kind of my story of how I landed and moved and transitioned from this global HR role to do what I've been doing over the last 10 years.
Do you mind if I take you back to 2008 a little? Because you said, you woke up in the middle of the night, panic attack, the straw that breaks the camel's back. Were you aware, or how aware were you that you had been struggling up until that point? I mean, you say that was a kind of like a lightning moment, but in that C-suite, how honest had you been able to be with yourself?
Very dishonest.
Yeah.
And I think, Scott, I think that's part of, and I know that this is going to sound like a real stereotype, but I think that's us men.
Yeah.
I don't think we're very good at getting in touch with our emotions and understanding how we might be feeling and talking about our emotions. We kind of find a way of kind of burying it and, living out that kind of tough stereotype that is expected of a man.
Yeah.
And, I often say, Scott, that my mother taught me dental hygiene. Brush your teeth when you wake up in the morning and when you go to sleep at night. Nobody ever taught me mental hygiene. Nobody ever taught me what might be some of the symptoms. And when I reflect on it right now, I think about it right now, Scott, there were definitely signs that I was beginning to move from a state of distress to becoming ill. But it's only in retrospect and over time that I've learned to become more in touch with my emotions.
Yeah.
That so yeah, this wasn't something that just suddenly happened. There clearly had been a build-up. I wasn't sleeping as well as I should have been sleeping. I was procrastinating over stuff. I wasn't wanting to do things that I used to love doing. I was losing weight because I would kind of wake up of a morning feeling anxious and then not want to eat breakfast or lunch. I mean, those were all the little signs. I just wasn't my normal self. I didn't want to go out with my mates on a Friday evening or a Saturday. So, but I just I wasn't in touch with some of those symptoms.
And where did that come from? What fueled that? Or was it just,
I think
sometimes we talk about the bucket of stress and eventually there's just one drop too many and it overfills.
Yeah. There was some stuff going on in my life. And I think probably the two biggest drivers at the time was one, we'd kind of come back from Australia in 2005. I was coming off the Unilever expatriate circuit. I was having to make some big decisions about where I was going to settle and put my roots. I'd been on that circuit for a good, 15 odd years. I'd saved a lot of money. There was all this money sitting in the bank. And now I had to sort of decide that I was going to buy a property. I was going to take all these savings. We were going to establish roots in the UK. And that was, that for me was a big decision. And that security blanket of having some money sitting in the bank and then suddenly all your savings have gone into this property. So there was that going on in my life. my daughter was struggling a little bit at school with dyslexia, and having brought it back from Australia and thinking whether that had been the right thing to do. And then at the time there was in my role, I was involved in organizing a global conference, which is something I hate doing. I'm not an event manager. And
Well,
it
we'll get
added
on to
stress
that.
and
Yeah.
strain. It added stress and strain. And
Yeah.
I think it was, there were just these things that hit me just at one time. And on top of that, I probably I wasn't, I wasn't looking after my overall health in the
Yeah.
way I do today. I wasn't protecting myself.
Well, we see that a lot. I mean, would you mind me asking roughly how old you were as well when you were entering that period, if that's not too?
So I was born in 62, so work
Yeah.
that out. So 2008, what's that? 62, 72, 82, 92,
So you'd be in
2002.
that
So I'm
sort of.
about 46.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Because we see
yeah,
this so often, particularly with men, that it's clumsily sort of titled the midlife crisis, but men do
yeah,
have their own version of the menopause where physically our bodies are slowing down, at that in that age bracket. And I think it always alarms me when I see the suicide statistics around guys,
yeah,
between 40, in that age bracket, because often they're exactly, in that situation with you where they've got so many different responsibilities, both to their, people in their personal life and loved ones and mortgages and school fees. But then they've got responsibilities to, a P&L and to a team beneath them and to a board above them. And
yeah,
they often tend to forget that, all those responsibilities are based off the foundation that they are okay,
yeah,
and they put everybody else first. So much about your story resonates with me, Geoff. And again, many people who follow mental know that the thing that woke me up was the death of my father, who again, strong alpha male, just like your friend, alpha male, suffered from depression, couldn't talk about his feelings, drank himself to death in literally the space of 3 months. And that
yeah.
really sort of woke me up to, the conversation that I'd not had with myself.
Mm.
As you say, guys not very good at having that conversation with themselves or even admitting to themselves that they might be struggling. Thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure you've shared it before, but thank you for sharing that. I mean, if not just men, but I do worry when I look at the suicide statistics around men, and I see that last year 700,000 people killed themselves, and 77% of them were men. But just I set this business up, for my kids' sake and for me, and to try and heal me and understand what was going on with me, as well as trying to make a difference. When you look at the world today, because we keep seeing different pieces of research, where do you think we are? Give us, give me your helicopter view.
I think we are living in very, very anxious times, Scott.
Mm,
I think we're living in very, very anxious times. So, you know, people who are currently employed right now, I think are feeling anxious and concerned about their own job security. We've got cost of living crises in different parts of the world.
yep.
People are really struggling. They're on the breadline. Financially, they're in trouble, and they're worried about their jobs and security. And organizations, are driven by quarterly profits and growth, and therefore are driving efficiencies.
Yeah.
So I think you've got that going on. And then you've got all these external factors taking place, whether that's, wars all over the world, terrible atrocities happening, across the Middle East, Ukraine, I mean, Africa.
Yeah.
We're living, and then I think you've got this advent of social media, which I think in particular for younger people is having a significant impact on their mental and emotional health. Somebody once said to me, um, comparison, comparison is the enemy of joy. Comparison is the enemy of joy.
I love that.
And, you got these kids and young adults comparing themselves every single day
Yeah.
to what's on Facebook and Instagram, and it's eroding their joy. And we are living at a time where we're on tablets all the time. You know, Scott, you and I remember when we were growing up. I mean, these
Yeah.
things didn't exist. So you were outside playing with your friends, connecting with nature, playing cowboys and Indians, jumping on a bicycle. And today, you know, where are people sitting, you know, in their living rooms on a tablet, on a
Yeah.
screen? So it's an anxious time. It's an anxious.
I worry as well. It's like it's interesting, and I'd be fascinated to get your take on this as well, Geoff, because so often, you know, millennials and Gen Z, you know, how many people that kind of look like us, Geoff, you know, and are in management positions talk about how they're not resilient and how they're so entitled, and you know, well, we were miserable, they should be miserable too. You know, never did us any
Mm,
harm, except it did because we're all, you know, our mental health is pretty screwed across the board.
mm,
Whereas, you know, these kids are growing up in, you know, like, as you say, our childhood, but you think like the pace of the world of work, you know, if you think back to even the, you know, year one of Unilever,
yeah,
you know, all those years ago, with this social media and with email and with WhatsApp and with
yeah,
technology and with AI, um, and the acceleration in GDP and productivity over the years, like these kids are literally leaping into a volcano
yeah,
that we never experienced.
yeah, yeah. And I think there's also this thing of instant gratification. Everything has to be done instantly, and you've got to be gratified instantly. And if you get a WhatsApp message, you've got to respond to that instantly. You
Hmm.
get an email, you've got to do that instantly. And, you know, we just, and maybe it was all subconscious in our days where we would just, you know, the fact that we had gaps in our days and we had time and and that was so healthy for us. It was
Yeah.
so healthy for us. You know, one of the bits of my discipline every single day is around recovery, is
Yeah.
about taking time out every single day, every 2 hours to just recover, just to have 5 minutes of doing nothing. We can so easily get into a day 24/7 almost, you know, and it's go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And and it's having a huge impact on our mental and emotional health.
I mean,
Having said that, Scott,
go on.
having said that, you know, I am also very mindful of, and I know this might sound a little bit provocative and it works against everything that I've done over the last 10 years. But I do also think that there is an element, and we've got to be careful that as we've opened up the conversation around mental ill health, around
Yes.
anxiety and depression, as we've opened up that conversation, and we've got people, particularly here in the UK, where, you know, the stigma is, we're beginning to make some real strides in the area of stigma. Um, you know, that doesn't mean that having a bad day means that I'm now anxious and I've now suddenly got general anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
And I do sometimes worry that that you know, young people today at times are kind of latching onto this and sort of, well, you know, I've had 3 days of feeling anxious, therefore I've got anxiety. Well, it might just be part of everyday life. You know, we all live on a spectrum, from surviving to thriving, and sometimes we have really bad days and
Yeah.
a bad week. But that doesn't mean that we are now clinically depressed or anxious.
But as you say, you know, and as you said, who's teaching, you know,
I know.
who's teaching them? And because
Yeah,
no one taught us about the mental
exactly.
hygiene that you talked about.
Exactly.
So they're as unprepared, and that's one of the things I always say about mental is that, you know, our kids, and I look at my 8-year-old daughter, and I've got a 22-year-old boy. Boy, he kill me for saying that, but he's my boy, you know, and a 17-year-old boy, um, and you know, you see the suicide statistics around,
Mm,
particularly around young men, you know, again,
mm,
terrifying. You know, I've got
mm.
an 8-year-old girl who's growing up, as you say, and it's really polarized,
Yeah,
really quite kind of like scary time in the world right now. Um, and they need better tools than we had. I mean, we
absolutely.
needed better tools, but they absolutely need it because everything's kind of accelerated and amplified.
And I think we had those tools just in terms of how we were kind of almost naturally
How
living
life
our
was set up,
lives.
how life
Do
was
you know what
set
I mean?
up.
Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas now, like what I was saying, going for that bike ride, being outside,
Yeah.
engaging with your mates, feeling a sense of community, playing in that football, whatever the case might be. And it was kind of part of our upbringing and how we lived our lives,
Yeah.
which was good for our well-being.
Yeah.
And today we so desperately need to be teaching young people some of the skills to protect themselves in this very anxious world.
I mean, I remember, and I've talked about this before, but I was bullied at school. But
Yes,
I remember, and I grew up in a very angry household as well. To be fair, as well, both my mother and father. It was a difficult place, but safest place in the world for me was my bedroom with my books, and I would escape into my little worlds of fantasy. You can call me a geek, that's fine. I don't care about that. But now, the bedroom, uh,
yeah,
unsupervised, particularly, and we see the research about the mental health effects of social media and smartphones on kids, but it can be the most dangerous place on the planet for our kids,
absolutely,
their their
absolutely.
their bedrooms. So if we can change gears and just look at the world of work, because I'd be daft not to ask you about that with those 25 years at Unilever in that HR position. You'd have seen many changes in the world of work. What do you think that companies, or how have we got so far lost on this one? Um, where do you think companies are going wrong on this? And when you walk into companies to try and help them have this conversation around mental health, what is it you tell them?
Okay, so thank you for that question, Scott, because I really, really do believe that companies have got to be taking a greater degree of accountability for the impact that they are having in the workplace on people's mental and emotional health. I often say we spend billions in health and safety.
Hmm.
Guess what? It all goes to safety. So
Yeah.
companies are hugely accountable for keeping people physically safe at work. There isn't the same degree of accountability to keep people mentally and emotionally safe. And I think that the frontiers, the next phase in the well-being journey in organizations is to get companies to take greater accountability and to think about the cultures that they are creating and how they shift those cultures such that people can truly thrive. How have we got there? I think it's the way in which we measure the success of organizations today. This hardwired quarterly results, how are you doing each quarter? How are you going to report to the city? And even if you're a family business, or a small business, I mean, the stresses and the strains around delivering on the numbers, I think has created fairly toxic and sick workplaces.
Mm.
So I think that's kind of how we've got there. I think that what is it that I'm saying to organizations to get them to have that aha moment where they think more strategically about the mental health and the well-being of their people? And over the last 10 years, Scott, as I've worked in different sectors, in different parts of the world, the most limiting resource that I see in workplaces today, the most limiting resource is the energy of people. People are frazzled.
Yep.
They can't wait for a Friday afternoon, and they don't really enjoy a Monday morning. They are frazzled. And I argue in the boardroom that the energy of your people is probably the most critical enabler of their performance at an individual level and at a team level. Because we all know what it's like working in a team or playing for a team that is passionate, that's got energy. We all know what that's like, and we know
Yeah.
how it performs. And we cannot be energized if we are not healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, and some people would say spiritually. And so the way in which I like to position this within organizations is that this is about enabling the performance of individuals, teams, and ultimately the organization. Why would you not want to focus and think more strategically about having an energized, happy, healthy workforce that is giving of their best every single day? Just tell me why you wouldn't want to do that. Why would you not want to do that?
Why
And
don't
yes,
they?
of course.
Why don't
And
they
yes,
want to do it,
hey?
Geoff? I mean,
Okay,
it still
okay.
beggars belief to me.
Yeah,
And
I'll
again,
tell you why. I'll tell you why I think they don't want to do it. And I haven't got any particular evidence to this. It's just insights. But I think the first thing, Scott, is companies don't want to know how stressed out their organization is. Senior leaders don't want to know. They don't want to run a survey on the well-being and the stress levels in their organization. It reminds me of when we first introduced engagement surveys in companies, to measure the engagement of people. Leaders were petrified of running engagement surveys because they were scared of the results. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a real fear factor, number one. All right. I don't want to see that my company is red with stress. I think the second factor is a capability factor, Scott, is I don't think we've yet got and built capabilities within an organization to deal with the concept of well-being. And so we have to draw on external capability, consultants, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a kind of capability factor. This well-being stuff, I don't really understand this well-being stuff. And then I think the third thing is that it's often seen, well-being is often, it's kind of seen as it's an either or. We either look after the well-being of our people or we drive performance. Whereas I think
it drives me mad, Geoff. It drives me mad. Because at the end of the day, like every single piece of research, if you look around it, it's like, okay, focus on the well-being and you get more performance.
Yeah.
Focus on performance only, you get less well-being and less performance.
But I think the two biggest barriers is fear and capability. What do we do? How do we do it? Have we got the capabilities? And you know what I would say to any leaders who are listening to us today? You know what? Every company is in the same position. You're all sick. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about the fact that you've got a stressed out organization. And yes, draw on some of those. And then I think finally, what I would say is that I've just lost my train of thought on that now.
It's okay. We could circle back to it.
Now. It'll come back to me. There's the fear factor, the capability factor. Anyway, it'll come back to me.
So I'm gonna, let's just put this in black and white for companies. If there are any leaders listening to this conversation, and I hope that they are, do you, as a man who has been 25 years in one of the biggest companies in the world, in the C-suite, global vice president, responsible for 170,000 people across 90 companies, how convinced are you about the ROI, the return on investment of looking after your people and creating that culture where people thrive?
I'm completely convinced that there's a return on investment. But this is what you've just prompted my final point by asking that question. So thank you, Scott. You know what? I think we've got to also find a way of making that emotional connection with members of the C-suite as to why this is so important. And I think we rely too much on the kind of trying to make the rational connection. So we all know the return on investment in investing in the well-being of your people. We all know that by having more females in senior leadership roles in organizations is good for your organization. Yet we make limited progress. And sometimes what I think is required is how do we, yes, of course, we can provide the data and we can show the return on investment. But how do we also bring that create that emotional connection to this topic? And I think we do that through storytelling. And we don't tell enough stories in organizations. We don't use storytelling enough. And I honestly believe that telling stories is the most powerful driver of behavior change. It's the most powerful driver of behavior change. But we don't do enough of that. And so could we use storytelling to make some of those more emotional connections? The saddest thing for me in my work Scott, is sometimes organizations who've poo-pooed this stuff and then pick up the phone and phone me and say, look, can you come in and give us a hand? Why are you interested in this now? Well, we had a suicide. One
Yeah.
of our employees, we had a suicide recently.
Yeah.
Guess what's happened? There's been an emotional connect to this particular issue.
Yeah.
Now we want to try and do something about it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I'm a 1,000,000% agree with you, particularly around the storytelling, because I see organizations that, even well-meaning organizations that just do isolated things, and it's
Yeah.
like dropping a pebble in a lake, and the ripples eventually die out. We need to be telling stories all the time, but it's amazing how powerful that those human stories are. If I talk
Yeah.
about my dad, if I talk about me going into therapy because I was getting overwhelmed by organizing an event, just like you actually, or you share your story, suddenly we are giving permission to other people. Go, oh, they look and sound like me, and if they went through it and they're feeling that, then it's okay that I'm feeling that.
Yeah.
I worry, you talk about that fear factor and the emotional fear factor. Again, it feels like, I understand. I mean, it's very easy, and I've worked for some good bosses, I worked for some great bosses, and I worked for some bad bosses. It's very easy to bash the boss, shall we say.
Mm.
But there is so much, I think, or it feels like there's so much personal fear in the boardrooms when we say, like, I don't want to know about what's happening in
Yeah.
my company. Part of that is that or is part of that because I don't want to know what's happening with me. Because when we look at the studies and the
Mm.
surveys and the data,
Mm.
the leaderships
Mm.
are as stressed,
Mm.
if not
Mm.
more,
Mm.
than the general population of the workforce. They're
Absolutely.
in distress as well.
Yeah. And that's why I think this whole thing of opening up this conversation
Mm,
and teaching leaders, particularly men, to be more vulnerable and it's okay not to be okay and to be having these conversations. I think that's a critical enabler to all of this. To feel that I can turn to my board colleague and say, you know what, rather than, oh, jeepers, I don't think I can turn to anybody and talk to them about how I'm feeling
mm.
because
I'm
of the
going to
stigma
ask
and
you.
this
I mean,
whole
look, we
uniqueness.
could carry on this conversation. Yeah, well, that is a massive fallacy. This whole idea that actually, when you talked about you made that decision, and back in 2008, that was a brave decision. When we talk about weakness,
Mm. Mm.
for
Mm.
me, and
Mm.
perhaps you might not be able to own it that much, but that is
Mm.
courage, being able to turn round to your
Mm.
peers and your colleagues back in
Mm.
2008 and saying, "This is what's happening with me."
But I was lucky though.
Mm,
I often qualify this by saying I was lucky in many ways. And let me tell you, there were a couple of things in my
yeah.
favor. The first one was I had a diagnosis. I'd been to a doctor. I had a diagnosis. It kind of liberated me. I think the second thing is I was 20 years into a career with Unilever. I was in a senior HR job. I'd built lots and lots of credibility. I wasn't a graduate trainee or a junior manager or middle manager being very, very
Hmm.
ambitious.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was in my favor is my personality. I've got the sort of personality where I wear my heart on my sleeve. So what you see is what you get. And if you look me in the eye, you'll see if there's something going on.
Mm,
Probably the most powerful thing, Scott, was at the time I was so lucky. I had a line manager who had a compassionate relationship to mental ill health. He had a compassionate relationship. He was he had experienced it in his family. You know what? I was so lucky. And it
yeah.
was, I think those four factors really did play a large part in me being able to be, as you say, brave, to be able to talk about it.
It's fascinating. Well, I was talking to very smart Professor Dr. Louise Lambert.
Mm-hmm.
She works in happiness. She's a positive psychology, and she often points to that research that says actually your line manager, when you talk about
Yeah,
employee well-being,
yeah,
the employee themselves is responsible for about 30% of their well-being
yeah,
inside the workplace, and in fact, their line manager has a 70% impact
yeah,
on them. So,
absolutely.
for good or for bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could talk to you for literally hours and hours and hours, but I'm gonna return to something you mentioned earlier because I think I'd love to just share it with the audience, which is you say you still work very hard every day
Mm,
to ensure your recovery. Um,
mm.
what are the things that you are doing? So if anyone's
Okay.
listening, they can figure out, oh yeah, that sounds like something I could bring into my life.
Yeah. And you could use it with your team in an organization, for example. Buddy up with somebody and in your team and talk to one another about it. And it starts with an acronym called CAN DO.
Can do.
CANDO. And the C, Scott, stands for connection. So I will find 5 minutes, 2 minutes, maybe 10 minutes every single day to do some connection. That might be connecting with a friend. It might be connecting with one of my girls. It might be connecting with nature. But connection is so important for our emotional health. So 5 or 10 minutes just doing some connection. The A in can do stands for be active. So I will find 30 minutes every single day to be active. Most days it's more than 30 minutes, but on my rest days, I will go for a walk for 30 minutes. I will find 30 minutes every single day to be active. It's very good for my physical health. The N in can do stands for just be nice. Just be nice to somebody every single day. See what that does to a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. It might just be a thank you. It might be helping an old lady across the road. I don't know what it is, but just being nice. The D stands for discover, be curious. So good for our neural pathways. So maybe learn something new each day, or do a Sudoku or a jigsaw, or just keep those neural paths. And that's why work is so good for us, because by going to work, we can be curious, we can learn. It's good for our neural pathways. And then finally, the O is called observe. I mean, learning to just observe, learning to recover. Every 2 hours, take that 5 minute break where you just observe. I call it a stroke the cat moment. Do nothing but stroke your cat. Don't look at your phone. Don't look at your laptop. Don't look at your iPad. Just take 5 minutes out to just
Be present.
listen to a bit of music, maybe do a bit of mindfulness, but just take some time out to recover. And I will dedicate 60 to 90 minutes every single day to all elements of can do. Connect, be active, be nice, discover, and observe.
I love that. And I think that's going to be a good one for our listeners. Well, I think that's almost a mic drop moment. But I also wanted to. We were talking. You were organising that global conference. I know the thing that challenged me the most last year was organising the mentl awards.
Yes.
So I'm really, really delighted and to share with the audience that this year for the mentl awards, which will be back 2024 edition for entries across the GCC and the wider Middle East, that Geoff, you've agreed to be a judge for our awards
Yes.
this year. Thank you
Yes.
so much. On that, again, we're both very much aligned on the importance of stories. What is the importance of recognizing the work that's being done inside of companies? Because I wanted to get your take on that, because for
Um,
me, I think it's important to shine a light on these initiatives.
I think it's so important, Scott. You know, um, it's just, I don't know. It creates a degree of it creates something that your company can be proud of. Kind of getting this award. It's something that can be part of your reputation, that you come and work for this organization where we're going to enhance your life. It's going to enhance your mental and emotional health. I think it's so, so important that we put that spotlight on this area, and that companies, can enhance their reputations, their ability to attract, retain, engage their talent. We do it in other areas. We have awards like, the best football team in the world. you know, why can't we have some awards which really put a spotlight on those organizations that are doing a great job? And by the way, others can then start to learn from those organizations
Exactly.
and
And
and and you
aspire.
know, and aspire and create that ambition and be that beacon. So this is a collective effort, and the more we can recognize those organizations that are doing a great job and allow others to either aspire or to learn from that, the better. Because guess what? If we get this right, you know what we might just do? We might just save a life.
Absolutely. That really is almost a mic drop moment. But I wanted to return to one more question. I'm a bit like, remember that Columbo, the detective? It was always at the end, oh, just one more thing, just one more thing. But you talked about something that was so powerful earlier and that helped you, and that was hope. So when we look at the world today, it is very, very easy to be overwhelmed with all of those difficulties that we see everywhere. What gives you hope?
You know what gives me hope? Young people. Young people's attitudes to the world. Young people's attitudes to one another. They are just so much more accepting, less judgmental, aware of the big issues that the world faces. I just get so much hope. I get so much hope from the youth and the young people in the world today.
Amazing. Geoff McDonald, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and it certainly didn't disappoint. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for spending the time with us on the podcast today.
Only a pleasure, Scott, and thank you for having me.
Speak again soon.
Keep up your great work in that part of the world.
Thank you, Geoff.